Anthropology students, this is your last topic of the semester. It is migration. Anthropology students, this is your last topic of the semester. It is migration. We will start by briefly discussing internal migration. Internal migration means moving inside the same country. So you do not cross borders when you are an internal migrant. This happens in all countries of the world, not only conflict zones, not only in underdeveloped countries. It happens here, for example, at a large degree. I'm an internal migrant. I was born East Quebec, and then I came to live here in order to work. So there are many reasons why people migrate inside their own country. A major reason is for work or studies. You move outside of your birthplace to go to school, and then you stay there to work. Generally, it happens when people move from regions, from the countryside, to the big cities. In the pictures, you can see a slum in Rio, in Brazil. This shanty town is populated by probably a lot of people that moved from the countryside to come to find a job in the city in order to survive. On the right picture, same thing in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and that's a very cool image I found. You see a fence, and down the fence, below in the image, there are really wealthy houses. I wish I had a house like that with a pool. And up, you see very close, there's only a fence in between, a slum here. And every morning, in these two situations, especially women will, men too, people will leave their house, take the bus or the chicken bus, or they walk, they cross that fence, they go to the houses of wealthy people to work as carpenters, as cleaning ladies, as nannies, and then at night they go back in their home again. So these are people who moved from the countryside to work in the city. We call it the push-pull phenomenon. It means, people moving to the city. There is a push factor here. The countryside is not able to support its population anymore because of the industrialization of farming. There is not enough job in the production sectors, in the food production, to make a living for many people. So people have to move away. And there's a pull factor. Cities attract people because of lifestyle, because of opportunities for studying and for working. Another example is Lima. This is the capital of Peru. And these are the examples of houses in shantytowns around Lima. And I know what I'm talking about because I've been living in these slums. So on the right picture, you can see a house. It's how people start their lives. And that's actually a really nice one. They're not all nice like that. But young people, your age, they decide one day they leave their parents' house and they build their own house. For us here, having your own house is a big deal. You have to save money for years. But there it's a gradual process. So the first thing you do, generally it's a free spot. You just expand the city wherever you want, and then the spot belongs to you. It's a process of registration. I will not explain here. But you need first a few mud bricks. You don't bother so much about fired bricks because it's desert and it doesn't rain. It rains about 24 hours a year, so it's not a big deal. And then you need esteras. These are woven fiber material. There's a fancy door here. It's made of metal. So it's not wealthy people, but they're well off. Corrugated metal roof or cardboard or woven material, whatever you can find to have some privacy. And this is your house. Running water will come after. sewers will come after, electricity will come after. It's the process of expansion. So at first, houses do not have all these utilities, and then the city will expand its facilities to avoid the spread of disease, and then people will start paying taxes for that. It's a process. After a few years of savings and working hard, as you can see around that little shack, there are houses made of fired bricks and cement. This is when you could save a little bit. And on the picture up left, you see houses that are there, they have been there for at least 10 years. They have sometimes 2 floors or even 3 floors. They're painted. They have glasses on windows. So people will take a few decades or even a few generations to achieve that development. This is the process of development of a slum, a shantytown. Another reason why people will move inside their own country is when they're forced to do it. Not because of jobs, not because of family, this is your own will, but when you have no choice, sometimes it's because of a natural disaster, a hurricane, an earthquake, you end up in a refugee camp inside your own country. Sometimes people are displaced because of construction projects, dams that will flood territories, will force the evacuation of people. Many often it's because of wars or internal conflicts. When people are displaced inside of their own countries, we call them IDPs. IDP stands for internally displaced people. Today, the estimation is 71 million people worldwide, persons worldwide, are displaced inside of their own country. And it's a tricky situation because when you end up in a refugee camp inside your own country, the UN has limited authority to be able to help you, because in order to be able to help, people must cross borders. So it's a very precarious situation for a lot of people to be an internally displaced person. Another kind of immigration is called international migration. This is when someone changes country, crosses borders. Most of the time, it's people from developing countries who move to developed, wealthy, industrialized countries. There are many reasons for international migration. Some people can do it for studying, study abroad, and then working abroad. Some people might escape conflicts, violence, hunger, natural disasters, extreme poverty, among other reasons to cross international borders. We will see details about 2 kinds of international migration. The first one is what we call economic migrants, and the second kind of international migration is the case of refugees. Today, according to the UN, about 258 million people live outside of their country, live as migrants. This number includes documented and undocumented immigrants. This means legal and illegal immigrants. And this number rises every semester I teach this course. I have to change and update that number every time because it's on the rise. This massive amount of people living outside of their country has many impacts on the world's politics and economy and cultures. A good example of that, on the impact it has on the world's global economy, is the Tonga Islands example. This is a tiny country. It's an island, a series of small islands east of Australia in the Pacific Ocean. In this country, 60% of their GDP, of their gross domestic product, comes from money citizens make abroad and send back home. We call that remittance. We'll see it. So more than half of their GDP is produced not inside the country, but outside of the country by people who migrated away. It also has this high number of migrants in the world also has an impact on relations between countries, on intercultural and international migrations. One example of that is the Muslim immigration in Europe right now. People from conflict zones in the Middle East migrate to Europe. Despite of their very small percentage in the global European population, they're causing now a kind of fear in the population of cultural mixing. We'll see that as well. So these are phenomena that happen because of international migration. A lot of international migrants are what we can call economic migrants. They're people who travel to another country in order to find work or to improve their standards of living or to ensure a better future, economic future for their children. The UN called them migrant workers. I will use the example of Mexican immigrants moving to the US to explain what an economic migrant is. And the wall you see on the pictures there, I'm sure you know about that wall. It's a section of the wall separating Mexico from the United States. You can see where that wall is built on the map here. You have United States and northern Mexico, and the blue line, the clear blue line is the wall. This map is 10 years old, but it has not changed since then. This famous wall Donald Trump wants to build is mostly, well, it's halfway done already. You see almost whole California is walled, Arizona, New Mexico, and the East Atlantic coast. What's missing is basically Texas, but the territory in Texas is really hard to manage. It's a very rugged territory with deserts. So well, the wall is there. A great deal of it is there. It's not everywhere a solid wall. Sometimes it is a fence with barbed wires, but there's something, a physical boundary there. These pictures show the west end of the wall going into the Pacific Ocean. What you see on the top right picture, at the right of the wall, it is San Diego, California. And on the left of the wall is Tijuana, Mexico. The two cities are neighbor cities, so except of the wall, there is an endless urbanization zone here. There is a wall, there is this frontier passing through the urbanized sector. And don't try to swim around that wall if you're from Mexico, because it's guard. There's a lot of guards and you can be shot. So people take it very seriously. There's a wall and it's very dangerous crossing it. Before seeing the next slides, I suggest you watch the video. The button there is a hyperlink to a video. If you watch these slides on YouTube, you will have to use the regular PowerPoint online to be able to see the video, to click the hyperlink. And after you see the video, I will continue with the explanations on the next slides. The video is more than 10 years old, but I never found a better one to describe the situation of Mexican immigrants trying to cross that desert between Mexico and the US. Now I will explain a little bit further what you have seen in the video. People crossing to the US illegally from Mexico or from other Latin American countries, as we will see, generally do not do that only for themselves. They do that for their whole extended family. Very often, the whole family will pool their resources, will gather money. Sometimes it will take years for them to do that, and will pay a smuggler, a coyote, that will help one person to cross the border. And this person, once he or she has crossed the border and finds a little job in the US, will send money to Mexico and help the whole extended family. So it's for the group, it's for the community, and not only for personal gain or interest. As they say in the video, these migrants from Mexico and all illegal migrants in the US working integrated into the formal economy, they're necessary into the economy. The populations count on them, they need them. If all of them go back home tomorrow, there are about 11 million illegal immigrants in the US right now. The economy would collapse because they're totally integrated into the informal and formal economy. They pay taxes, most of them. There's no real verification or background check done before hiring people in the US for small minimum wage jobs. It is very easy to get fake IDs, fake social security number, or fake ID card. And people will work, will have an official salary, and pay taxes at the end of the year. So they are totally integrated into the formal economy, some of them, a lot of them, even if they're illegal. Those who are not integrated into the formal economy will work, especially women, as daycare providers, cleaning ladies. Men will work on construction for houses. And this is modern day slavery. They do not earn a lot of money and they work a lot. Daycare, official daycare, is really, really expensive in the United States. So a lot of families depend on illegal nannies to take care of their children. And immigrants integrated into the formal economy do not earn a lot. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the minimum wage in the US right now is $7 an hour compared to $13 here. And rents are more expensive in the US than they're here. So these illegal immigrants who work minimum wage will work very often 2 jobs, 2 shifts. This is 80 hours a week to be able to pay the rent and the food for their families. That's a very harsh life. And this is the case of Mexican illegal immigrants. You take the land route if you're Mexican because it's the neighboring country. But a lot of illegal immigrants integrated into the formal economy of the US are not from Mexico. They are from African countries, they're from Asian countries, and they cannot swim to the US. So they will not cross the borders by walk as Mexicans will do. They will fly to the US. They will get a tourist visa. They will fly to the US and never go back home. This is the mostly used technique to enter the US as an illegal immigrant. And that's a harsh life as well because you never go back home. If you ever go back, you're not admitted anymore in the United States. And very often people will have children in the US. So they really don't want to go back home, whatever happens there, because they will be separated from their children. As you see in the picture here, there are, shops in border cities in Mexico, what people buy before they try to cross that dangerous land, borderland. So what they don't show or tell in the video, what people buy, you see on the top image, they're carpet slippers. They're kind of slippers you put on your feet to avoid your steps being detected by underground radars detectors. So this is a very important thing to buy. People will also buy warm clothes and black water bottles because clear or white water bottles will reflect the moonlight and they have more chances to be caught by helicopter patrols. Women will buy contraceptive pills before they go. That's a very high demand at border shops in Mexico because they know very well they're going to be raped on the way, and they think at least I'm not going to get pregnant because of that. So all this situation is a consequence of very strong inequalities between countries. And the border between the US and Mexico is unique in the world. It is the longest border between the wealthiest country of the world and another very, very poor country. So there is a large border between two countries that are drastically different from each other. Remittance is a very important notion, an important word to know. It is a word to describe the money immigrants make in their new country and send home every week or every month. This is the case for legal or illegal immigrants. This is a lot of money sent in poor countries, not by international help, not by the UN, but by regular citizens trying to help their families in poor countries. And a lot of families in poor countries depend on that money that is sent to them every month. You should see the lineups at Western Union in American cities on Fridays or Thursdays when people get their paycheck. There's a lot of lineups. There's a lot of people sending money home. Now I will talk about caravans and refugees. These are two different situations. What I will explain about caravans and then about refugees was valid before the COVID-19 crisis. Since last March, many international borders are closed, even to migrants or to asylum seekers. This situation will come back, though, after the crisis is over. How transformed, how different, no one really knows. Only history will tell us. But I will explain these two different situations because it is still happening in the world, even if borders are getting harder to cross. Caravans. This is a new phenomenon that really started in Latin America in the fall of 2018. This is about 2 years ago. And people traveling in these caravans, you will see pictures on the next slide. It's very impressive. It's not easy to classify them. It's not easy to tell if they are economic migrants or if they are refugees. Of course, they travel in seek of a better socioeconomic situation, of more decent life for their children. A lot of them travel with families and children. So they would be economic migrants, but their situation in their home country is so desperate. They fear hunger, they fear gang violence, that they kind of become refugees, because if they stay, they might face death or a miserable life. So it's not easy to determine, and they're kind of in between being economic migrants and being refugees. They live in huge groups. They travel together throughout Central America until they reach the southern frontier of the United States. They cross Honduras. This is the country you see in purple here on the map. Guatemala, some of them cross El Salvador, and they reach Mexico, and they cross Mexico. It takes weeks and months to do this walk. They cross these countries by foot. And this phenomenon started a little bit by accident in October of 2018. One young man put this ad you see on the left on social media, La Caminata del Migrante. It means the walk of the migrant, hoping that he would meet at the train station few people to travel with him to United States by walk, because he cannot afford doing it in another way. So he put that on social media, showed up at the train station in Honduras, in San Pedro Sula, and thousands of people came. Not a few of them. Thousands of people joined him in his walk, a lot of them women, mothers, and small children. And they started to walk together. So in 2018, in the fall, about 7,000 migrants left Latin America and crossed many countries, including Mexico, to reach the Southern American border. What they escape is poverty, is corrupt governments, is a collapsing economy, and especially in Honduras, gang violence, in Mexico as well. There is a lot of cases of cities where gang violence is very problematic. I've been crossing a lot of countries alone in Latin America, and the only time in my life I was very afraid for my life was in Honduras. It's not an easy country for a woman to live in. So this is what people escape. They left in October of that year, and a second wave of caravans left in January, in early 2019. And why people choose to group in these large caravans instead of traveling alone, it's because of a very simple reason. Being in a group is a protection. When you travel alone, especially as a mother or a woman, and there's a lot of families traveling, they risk robberies, rapes, or kidnappings. This is a common situation. So people avoid that when they are in groups. They protect each other. Also, they don't have to pay a smuggler when they travel in groups. That was very impressive to see it in the news, these large group of people traveling. You see a picture of them on the next slide with one of the route they took. But this route eventually separated in 4 separate routes. It was very impressive to see these massive gatherings of peoples, and politicians in the US exploited these impressive images to scare the American population, to tell them we're invaded by Mexicans here. But really, they were 7,000. Even if it's impressive on a picture, that's a tiny drop of water in the whole group of all migrants illegally entering in the US in a year. There are nearly 500,000 entering the US every year illegally. So 7,000 there was not a big fraction of that 500,000, but it was impressive for the American population to see, and it created fear in the population. Another kind of international migrant is a refugee. Here on this slide, you have a summary of the definition of the UN about what a refugee is. It's someone who has to escape his or her country, because if they stay, they face death for many reasons, because sometimes of discrimination about race, religion, about sexual orientation, gender, political opinion. Also, if they stay, they face death because of local conflicts, because of bombing, or hunger caused by conflicts. So basically, you are a refugee if you are forced to leave your home, if your home is destroyed, and if you cross a border of a country. To explain the case of refugees, I chose the example of Syrian refugees because in the last years, nearly a decade now, Syria is the country in the world that has produced the higher number of refugees, the higher number of first internally displaced people, IDPs, and also the highest number of refugees. The original population of Syria is 23 million. And more than half this population is displaced right now, either internally or internationally. And when you see images of Syria in the news, you see bombings, destruction. But Syria, before this crisis they're in, was not a country people wanted to escape from. It was didn't have a perfect political system, according to our Western opinion. The civil rights were sometimes not respected, but it was a country that was developed with a good education system, with a good health system. What you see here is a picture of Damascus before the war. So you see, it looks like Quebec City. It was a beautiful country to live in. The next four slides explain well how people and why people started to leave Syria. The flow of refugees started during the Arab Spring in 2011, but really it is in 2015 that the situation drastically escalated, where millions of people started to cross borders to reach Europe, first by land, then by sea, and both. What you see on the map here is the situation in 2015. 2015, as I said, was a turning point in the process. People escape most of them escape Syria, but a lot of them come as well from Iraq and Afghanistan. And Turkey here is in a special geographic situation because people from these Middle East countries had to cross Turkey before they could reach Europe. This is why Turkey is at the center here of all these influx of migrants. First, people used the land route because it's the safest one, it's the least dangerous one. So where you see the green arrow is where people crossed from Turkey to Bulgaria and then to Northern Europe, most of them having Germany or England as a destination point. But really quick, in a matter of months in 2015, land borders were closed by fences and walls and military troops. So this land route here, where you see the green arrow, this small land route, was closed real quick. So people had to cross the sea to reach Greece and then by land go to Europe. This is this point between Turkey and Greece, this sea there, this agency that people try to cross. It's the most dangerous point of their journey, and this is where you see a lot of people dying at sea. So the only route now between the Middle East and Europe is the agency between Turkey and Greece. So this is where most migrants end up while crossing the sea are four islands. You see them highlighted in red on this slide here. These islands belong to Europe, they belong to Greece, and refugees are now stuck there in refugee camps. Turkey has a land border, with Bulgaria and Greece, and in 2016, Turkey agreed to close this border to keep the asylum seekers inside the country, and in return, they would receive billions of euros from Europe to help them relocating these migrants, these asylum seekers, give them legal residence and help them being integrated into the population. But the situation is very slow in camps. The process of doing that is extremely slow. And the situation became critical in refugee camps in Turkey and became unbearable. There is a lack of facilities, a lack of hygiene. So people suffer a lot from the cold, from hunger, from disease, and from violence. So refugees and asylum seekers risk it. They cross the sea, they cross the Aegean Sea to reach the Greek islands. Some of them come from Syria, but a lot of them also come from other countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, Bangladesh, and some 70 more countries. In 2019, 60,000 of them reached Greece by the sea route. And mainly they land on 4 islands: Lesbos, Chios, Samos, and Kos. You have them on the picture here. But now the camps on these islands have the exact same conditions as they were in Turkey. People suffer from cold, from hunger, from disease, and from violence. The conditions there are really, really extreme. You have on the next slides pictures of the Moria camp in the island of Lesbos. I'm sure you have heard of this camp. There are 20,000 asylum seekers now, among them many children that are alone because their parents die on the way. And the camp is designed to hold 2,800 migrants. So it's almost more than 6 times more, the number. And Greece by itself is not able to help such an amount of desperate human beings. There are plans to relocate these asylum seekers within the European Union, but this plan is not accepted by many European countries. Some countries even openly say that they do not want any refugee within their borders in order to keep the racial purity intact. This is the case of Poland right now, for example. Some influential leaders from the United Nations agree that these conditions in camp are left as they are on purpose to discourage people to take the trip to Europe. But people, these human beings are desperate. They take the trip or they die in their home country. So they will take the trip. So no one knows how this situation is going to end, especially now with the virus, the coronavirus going around. This is the unknown here. Here, I would like you to watch the video before I explain. It's a short video, it's about 12 minutes from CBC News that explains the situation in Quebec and Canada. And then you can hear my explanations about what they do not tell in the video. Those who are listening to this PowerPoint on YouTube, you can click on the hyperlink in the regular PowerPoint to see the video. The situation in Canada is very special about refugees entering the country because we live in a bubble here. We are in a nearly unique situation in the world, a situation we share with only a few countries, namely Australia and New Zealand. We are a developed country where people want to be accepted as refugees, but we have no border with any other country than the wealthiest country in the world, and we have no land route that is possible for people to enter here, and people have no possibility to come here by the sea. So we are totally isolated in Canada. And this is almost unique in the world. But there is something happening here since January 2017. In 2017, Donald Trump took office in the United States. And since that time, illegal immigrants fear more than ever deportation, fear being deported in their home country, so they fear death in their home country. The solution for them is to cross somewhere to escape the United States. And the only place to cross, to come in by land, is Canada, in hopes to be accepted as refugees. And this is what people are doing right now. So it's a new situation that we live with here. And I realized in the past years that students do not know about this situation. So the strategy of people is to land anywhere in the United States, fly to JFK, New York, take a bus to a city called Plattsburgh in Upper New York State, take a taxi to a little road called Roxham Road, and cross to Canada. And this route is known now internationally. This phenomenon happens now because of what we call the Safe Third Country Agreement. And what I will explain now is also written in the two next slides, and they don't say it clearly in the documentary, so I will explain it clearly here. The Safe Third Country Agreement is an international agreement that says that someone who wants to request a refugee status has to do it in the country where they land first. So you can't land somewhere in France or Germany or the US and then shop around where you will be accepted as a refugee. You have to ask for your status to be processed, for your request to be processed in the country where you land, if this country is a safe country. Canada is a safe country, and USA is considered by the UN as a safe country as well. If it is a safe country for illegal immigrants or not, well, that's a matter of opinion, but the UN says they are. And what they don't see in the documentary, it is very hard to come to Canada as a tourist, as people do massively in the US. It is really hard. Here, if you want to get a tourist visa to fly to Canada, you need a solid proof of income. You have to prove that you earn enough money in your country, that you have a stable job that's waiting for you after your trip. It's really hard to obtain a visa. Whereas it is very easy to land in the US as a tourist. Visas, when you can afford it, are granted very easily. So people naturally will land in the US as tourists, but want to come to Canada to be accepted as a refugee because we are considered a safer country here. If people cross from the US to Canada at an official checkpoint, a border checkpoint, they will be rejected because they did not land in Canada. They have to ask for a refugee status in the US. So they will be rejected here because they don't have any legal paper, they don't have any visa, and they will be returned back home where they fear death. If they cross illegally by the woods or by small roads, what happens to them? The RCMP arrests them. And this is what people want. They want to be arrested. They cross the border with their hands up, arrest me. And then once they are arrested, their refugee request can legally be processed. There is a series of measures they have to take. First, they are detained at the border for 1 or 2 days. Then, while waiting for a background check to be done, and if they don't have any criminal record anywhere, they are sent to other shelters, most of them in Montreal, where there's a more serious background check that is done. And then if they don't have any criminal record or problem, they can ask for a refugee status to be processed. Half of them, about 50%, are accepted in Canada because they are considered real refugees. half of them are not accepted and are deported back home in their home country. And they take the chance because people consider, well, they don't want to go back home, it's worth taking the chance, and they do not want to stay in the US because they are afraid of being deported. So thousands of people every year now cross at Roxham Road, most of them in summer because it's not an easy route to take. It's not as hard as the road between Mexico and the US, but it's not safe. A lot of people were injured and frozen, had serious frost bites by taking that road in the winter in the past. So thousands of people cross there all the time. Well, until the end of March this year, because now since we have this COVID-19 situation, the border is definitely closed. But until a few weeks ago, this was the situation. So what's the solution? Because there's human exploitation here. There is a very heavy bureaucratic process here. So what are the solutions to avoid such a high number of people crossing a border illegally, being arrested, risking being exploited by smugglers, and risking their health? The solution depends on the political party. The Conservative Party has the opinion that we should make the whole border between Canada and the US and official checkpoints. So no one can physically be there and enter Canada for a refugee status to be processed. All people would be returned in the US. They could not enter. The Liberals are in a status quo situation. They are in a delicate situation because they're in power. So if they don't want a diplomatic crisis with the US right now, so they leave things as they are. The NDP says we have to void the Safe Third Country Agreement. We have to consider that the US is not a safe country, and then refugees could enter by a regular checkpoint for their refugee request to be processed and not enter by the woods, risking their health and being arrested. So depending on the political party, there are different points of view, and the situation is still evolving here. So we have a new situation since 2015 where the rise of conflicts, the rise of corruption abroad caused a rise in the arrival of refugees in North America, in Europe. And this caused the rise of intolerance in the population. Intolerance is not a new phenomenon. It has always existed. But a few years ago, I would say since in the last 5 years, it took more important proportion in North America and Europe. What you see here in the pictures are top left, Georgia, United States. It's an example of a protest against immigration, but more than that, a protest for white supremacy. People are not ashamed anymore in the US to protest against the arrival of different people from different faith and racial groups. And neo-Nazi groups in the US are not ashamed anymore to protest because it's better accepted. So we have a rise of that in the last year. On the right, these groups, these are two examples, Storm Alliance, La Meute, there is another one called Soldats d'Odin, this is in French. This is in the Quebec province mostly. these groups, if you look at the surface of their claims, they're groups for the pride of being Québécois, the pride to express a national identity, which is not a bad thing. But if you scratch a little bit under the surface, you see that these groups are racist groups. They are white supremacist groups. So they're dangerous because they try to show a nice side, but they have another side where people join them and they scratch under the surface. What you see on the left, this is in Ottawa. This is an image from a protest 3 years ago. A protest that was organized in Ottawa against Motion 103. Motion 103 was a motion adopted exactly 3 years ago in the Parliament. It's a motion against Islamophobia, which is a good thing. A motion against the expression of racism. And here, people are protesting against this motion. So what they're protesting for is for the right, what they say is the right of liberty of expression, but what they protest for really is the right to express Islamophobic claims and ideas. So we live in a time where there is a strong rise in intolerance in the world. This is the example of North America. And this is the situation in Europe. In Europe, there's even a stronger rise of intolerance with immigration. You see the countries on the map here, 1, 2, 3. One is Hungary. In Hungary, right now, the Fidesz party is in power. They got half of the popular vote. It's a right-wing populist party. And in one of their official statements, the government says that in Hungary, they say we do not want to be diverse. We do not want our own color and culture to be mixed with that of others. So this is a open, strong, white supremacist and Christian supremacist statement. In the same country, Jobbik, the second political party, got 90% of the votes. This is an openly, clearly neo-Nazi party. In Austria and Switzerland, respectively, the Freedom Party and the People's Party got 1/4 of the vote at the last elections. They're not in power, but 1/4 of the votes is a very big proportion. And these are right-wing populist parties. So last time such high numbers of right-wing parties were seen in Europe it's the first time it happens since Hitler. So Europe is in a special situation right now, and it will be, I don't want to say scary, but it will be interesting to see what happens in the next years, because this is new what's happening now in Europe. It can be dangerous. So the population in general, deals with immigration differently in different countries. They have different approaches. They have different perceptions of what immigration is in different countries. So each country will react differently. There are two opposite approaches to immigration. I will explain them one by one. They are the inclusive approach to immigration and what we call the multicultural approach to immigration. I would not say one is better than the other. They're different. And in each approach, there are people that are more intolerant, more people that are more tolerant. It's just a question of point of view and how we deal with that. I will start with the inclusive approach to immigration. And the best example I can find is the Quebec province. But in France, they kind of react the same way. Okay, the inclusive approach to immigration, and this is important. Remember that. Same thing for the multicultural approach. The inclusive approach is that people are very concerned about how immigrants fit in the general population. It does not mean people don't want immigrants to come. They're welcome or not, it depends on the individual, but ideally they would have to behave, dress as Quebecers, as local people. This is the inclusive approach. This is what we do in Quebec a lot. Example, we have this will to control religious signs worn by state employees. And this is not only with one political party or one group of people, it's everywhere. You have examples on the images here. This is the same preoccupation in Quebec to prevent public employees from showing religious signs. In 2013, it was a preoccupation for the Parti Québécois in power. In 2017, it was a preoccupation for the Liberals in power. And right now, it's a preoccupation for La Coalition Avenir Québec in power. So whoever is in power, whatever is the political party, we have this inclusive approach in mind in Quebec. We have a concern about how immigrants will be able to fit in the population. We have this ideal of a secular state here. This approach comes from somewhere in our history and our identity. In Quebec, we are a minority. And as all minorities in the world, we have this fear that is conscious or not, but this fear of assimilation, this fear of disappearing. This is a common thing for all minorities. Also, in Quebec specifically, the Catholic Church has a tremendous power on people, especially on women, but on all people in the province until the 1950s. And this power was abusive. So citizens were abused by the, not necessarily directly abused, but abused in their rights by the Catholic Church for decades here. So in the 1960s, people ditched religion, started to eliminate religion from their daily lives as a reaction for this abusive power. And we kind of went too far. We ditched religion entirely. We developed a kind of allergy to religion and all religious signs, and this is visible most of the time in immigrants. Immigrants don't have any problem of using religion, and this is one of the reasons why we use this inclusive approach here in Quebec. The opposite approach would be the multicultural approach. We also call this one the patchwork approach. The best example I can give you is United States. It does not mean, I will explain the approach, it does not mean people are less racist or more tolerant, or it's different ways to see things. I could call that, to explain it, the live and let live approach. As long as people make the system work, as long as they pay their taxes, as long as they're integrated into the formal economy, they're kind of free to continue using or showing their cultural traditions, including their language, their faith, their fashions, etc. People don't care so much less than here. You will see police officers in New York wearing religious signs, and people are not offended by that. It's interesting, what you see on the map here is Crowns Heights in Brooklyn. I was living in that neighborhood, and I was seeing daily something interesting. And a good illustration of the multicultural approach. East of Kingston Avenue, you were in Israel, purely. There were only Hasidic Jews in the streets. And west of Kingston Avenue, you were in Jamaica. It was a pure Jamaican neighborhood. And people kind of lived together without any friction. You can't imagine two more different ethnic groups in the world, I think, Hasidic Jews and Jamaicans. And people were sharing parks and facilities, and you could see a Jewish woman and a Jamaican woman sitting on the same bench and splendidly ignoring each other, but living together. So it's the patchwork. It's the, okay, you're there, I tolerate you, you are free to do what you do as long as you pay your taxes, as long as you behave normally as a citizen legally. What's the problem? There's no problem. There is an explanation why people behave like that in the US, and they're not so concerned about how immigrants will assimilate. The United States is the wealthiest and strongest ethnic group in the world, so they do not fear assimilation. Even if some people, some citizens express that fear, the English language will not disappear. Their religion will not disappear. They don't fear that. Their economy will not disappear. So they're not afraid of this. They don't have this fear, this unconscious fear of assimilation we have in minority countries, in minority places. And also they have this notion that America was built by immigrants. So they are already a patchwork nation. So it's normal why they use more this multicultural approach. So most people agree now that we really need this immigration in wealthy countries, in developed countries, because we have a low birth rate and there is a shortage of workers for employment. So we need people coming from abroad to fill these gaps in the workforce. So there's a new notion here. With immigration comes the notion of accommodations. Accommodations is a very old notion. We were always accommodating people because of disabilities, because of learning disabilities. We accommodate students. But now there's a new notion coming with accommodations. It's the notion of reasonable cultural accommodation. And this notion started to be very important in the province of Quebec a little bit more than 10 years ago. A little bit before 2010, populations of immigrants or of cultural communities started to want to have their voices heard and to have their rights respected around. So now they kind of voice these requests for accommodations. They didn't dare to do it before. So what is a reasonable accommodation or an accommodation? It's to change certain rules or certain ways of doing things in order to accommodate people of different cultures. For example, when I was teaching in the States, a lot of our final exams were happening on Saturdays. And we had at my university a big Jewish community, and they would not take their finals on Saturdays. So I accommodated them. I was giving them their finals the day after, the Sunday or the Monday after, so everyone's happy here. That was considered a reasonable accommodation. Another reasonable accommodation maybe would be to have at the cafeteria at least one option with no pork or no meat in it to accommodate people from different communities. So this is the definition of a reasonable accommodation. You can find many other examples of that. And this situation of people wanting their rights to be respected became more important, as I said, a little bit more than 10 years ago here. As you know, Canada, but also the province of Quebec, because I'm talking about Quebec here, Quebec is welcoming immigrants, has been welcoming immigrants for decades, centuries even. But the number of migrants rose in recent years, And we have a special moment in our history, a turning point, I would say, in our history, where we kind of collectively realized that we need to be careful and respect people's rights and dignity. And you are probably too young to remember this event when it happened. It started in 2007, but reached enormous proportion in 2008. So this is 12 years ago. You were young, but maybe you've heard about it because it came back in the news a few years ago. It is a crisis that happened at Hérouville, and you have to know this little part of our history here in order to understand. So Hérouville is a very small town, about 12,000 people, 100% Christian and white at the time, except for one boy, one adopted child from Haiti. And I suspect with what happened, they're probably mostly 100% white and Christian still today. It's a small town north of Trois-Rivières. Trois-Rivières is between Quebec and Montreal. It's close to Saint-Tite, so it's a remote place. And they did something that the mayor of the city sponsored a project, a kind of project that we see in many towns in Quebec, in many cities in Quebec. We have that in Gatineau as well. It was a guide for immigrants. Guidebook for immigrants. And these guidebooks exist in most cities, and they are pretty useful for some information. For example, in the guide of Gatineau, you see informations such as how to register your kids in school, how to get a health card, a social security number, employment. So these are very useful information. But sometimes these guides are going too far. For example, about 10 years ago here in the guide of Gatineau, it became controversial because they kind of include sometimes cultural guidelines, which is okay. Men and women are equal. We cannot do certain things. We cannot request certain things. But sometimes they go too far, these guides. And the guide of Gatineau, for example, was saying that Quebecers used to take a shower once a day, and this is what we expect from people. It's kind of a way to say that Quebecers are clean and maybe other people are not. So this was clearly racist, and it was removed from the guide after a controversy. But the guide of Hérouville went further. It was written there in 2007 in the new guide that it is prohibited in Hérouville to stone women to death or to burn them alive. And this was clearly targeting one community, because of some things you see in the news in radical groups in the Middle East. And it was not welcomed by members of different communities. Everyone was unhappy about that. No one is burning women alive and stoning them to death in most countries of the world, in all countries of the world, except of small radical individuals. This is called murder. Of course, people don't murder people. So everyone was unhappy there. The minority communities were unhappy in the province because they felt targeted, they felt racism, and Quebecers were really unhappy about that guide as well, because we looked like a bunch of racist people with stereotypes. So without knowing it, without probably wanting it, the mayor of Hérouville started a nationwide controversy in the province. The situation became serious enough that very early, about a month after the publishing of this controversial code of conduct, the government of Quebec sponsored a commission to try to settle conflicts between immigrants and Quebecers, if conflicts there were. So at the head of this commission were two men, two university teachers, professors, Gérard Bouchard, a French speaker, a sociologist, and Charles Taylor, a philosophy professor and an Anglophone. So, there's always a diversity needed here. And they visited 17 cities in the province, from major cities like Montreal to very small cities of a few thousand individuals in regions, to cover a good sample of the population. So they went from city to city to hear what people had to say about immigration, to hear Quebecers and also to hear immigrants about their opinion on how welcomed or not they feel here. So very nice things were heard and very ugly things were heard as well. It took a few months to cover the sample of cities, and then a report came after that. A report of such a commission is not a bill, is not a motion, is not a law. It's a report, is recommendations. And recommendations, main recommendations from the report were that, very simple, very straightforward, minorities have to adapt a little bit, because here there's a secular nature of institutions. There's equality between men and women, and these are important values in Quebec. But on the other side, Quebecers cannot ask immigrants to totally assimilate. It's not possible, and it's probably not desirable as well, because some cultural diversity is good for the population. It's good for being open-minded and learning things. So if we migrate elsewhere as Quebecers, we would not change all our behaviors. We would continue speaking French among us. We would continue dressing the same. So we can't ask people to totally assimilate, but we can ask them to make an effort to adapt to the secular nature of institutions. So both parties here have to do some compromise. Among other recommendations in the original report were the following that we sometimes hear in the news still today, especially the notion of religious signs worn by public servants. In the report, they mention that according to the majority of the population, no religious signs should be worn by public servants exerting a coercive authority. A coercive authority means I have power on people. I can put them in handcuffs and in jail. So this includes police officers, judges, and prison guards, but it does not include teachers, professors, health workers, and daycare workers. So this was a recommendation in the original report. And then after that, after the killings at the mosque in Quebec City 3 years ago, Bouchard changed his mind to say that maybe this notion of prohibition of religious signs should change, but these are just opinions and recommendations, they're not laws. If we go back to our notion of reasonable accommodation, it's easy to know what an accommodation is, but it's not so easy to know if it's reasonable or not. It's basically case by case, and there are previous decisions from the authorities we can base ourselves on to determine if right now something is reasonable or not. So sometimes it's not easy, and it was problematic more years ago when this notion was starting in the communities. One example of that is the one YMCA for women in Montreal, one gym for women in Montreal. It was a nice gym with windows and in which women could work out while looking outside by the windows. And there was a synagogue very close to the gym. And Jewish leaders were not happy about that gym because they claimed it was distracting young men trying to study the Torah in the synagogue. So the YMCA accepted to cloud the windows to please the Jewish community. But customers of the gym were really unhappy about that because they paid for a membership in a gym in which they could work out by looking outside. And now they could not anymore. They wanted their money back. So the YMCA unclouded the window, changed the windows again. And I don't remember how the story ended, but it was pretty problematic. So sometimes you have to determine if something is reasonable or not. Some requests are clearly not reasonable. There were other examples in the news years ago. For example, some people wanted to always have a female doctor available in the ER so women could see a female doctor, physician. So this was not considered reasonable because you can choose your doctor to be a female, your family doctor, but when you go to the ER, you have an emergency. Sometimes, very often, especially during the night, there's only one doctor there, and this doctor is a man. It would be too expensive for the province and unfeasible, impossible to have always two doctors if there's a man there. So this was not considered reasonable. So what do we look at in Quebec to determine if something is reasonable or not? We look at financial costs. If it is too expensive, it is not considered reasonable. We look for health concerns. If it's dangerous for people, it is not considered reasonable. Last year, there was a controversy in Vancouver in which workers from the piers were asking, they were Sikh Indians, Sikh S-I-K-H, where in this community men wear turbans and they cannot remove the turbans, but you cannot wear a helmet if you have that turban. So they wanted to be accommodated to work in the piers and not wear helmets. It was not granted because it's dangerous for them. If they receive something in the head, they will be injured. So they were relocated in other duties where they do not have to wear helmets. So another accommodation was found for them. So it has to be cheap. It has to be not dangerous. It has to have a low impact on the majority. If you help a few people, but it has a tremendous impact on the majority, it's not considered reasonable. And on the other side, the benefit for the minority you're helping must be as high as possible. So one example of an accommodation that is granted to people sometimes that is considered reasonable is some hours at the public pool without men. So this is totally reasonable because it's no cost. It's not dangerous for anyone's health. It has a very low impact on people here because this hour can be in the afternoon. So you will just use the pool another day, or it can be only one evening of the week, for example. And it benefits a minority a lot because otherwise women would not work out, would not go to the pool if there is not this hour without men. So this is considered reasonable. It's the same thing as there are hours for families at the ice rink. It's the same type of accommodation here. Still, sometimes it is hard to determine if an accommodation should be granted or not, because accommodations, religious accommodations, cultural accommodations, really are about human rights. Because the right to religious freedom, the right to liberty of religion, is a basic human right. It's written here in the Charter of Human Rights. So this is why we accommodate people, because they want their human rights to be respected. But on the other side, sometimes human rights are in conflict. If you respect one human right, you will not respect another one because they conflict with each other. So you need a hierarchy of human rights sometimes, and there are judges who will decide that. The best example I can give you for that situation is a situation that happened in British Columbia years ago. It was a man from a religious community. It was a very tiny minority religious sect. He was not Muslim, he was not Jewish, it was a minority Christian sect. I do not remember the name of it. But in his religion, he had the right to be polygamous. So he was asking the the government of British Columbia to have his multiple wives officially in his papers, in his IDs, in his tax papers at the end of the year. And this was the accommodation he was asking. And the court of British Columbia said that the provincial court said, no, you cannot. You have to choose one of your wives and put her as an official spouse in your tax papers. You cannot put them all. Otherwise, you will have it. You would beneficiate from too much money as your tax return, because they're not children, they're adult women. So the guy appealed, and the Court of Appeal said, no, you cannot be polygamous officially in British Columbia. It went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't, because there are two human rights in conflict here. First, liberty of religion, and second, equality between sexes. Because in a polygamous union, there is no equality between sexes that is considered here. And in Canada, equality between sexes is above liberty of religion in a hierarchy of human rights. So it is impossible to be officially polygamous. The judge said, you can do whatever you want in your home. You can have all your wives living with you. There is no problem. It is your private life, and the state will not intervene in your private life. But only one wife in her IDs will be considered your official wife. This was the decision of the Supreme Court. So it's reasonable accommodations become reasonable sometimes after a very complicated process, because they involve a conflict between two basic human rights.